Hi, Alex.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good, good, good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you okay. I don't know if it's on my end or your end, well, for you and Alondra, but it sounds like there's maybe a few seconds delay.
Yeah, I hear
Mm-hmm.
the delay, but it does sound
Okay.
clear. It does sound clear.
Well, I am responding. I will respond.
Fantastic. Well, I'm already recording.
Perfect.
All right. So, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast interview. So, now that I'm retired, and this all came up from a conversation Alondra and I had this past fall. We started talking about things, to do, new things, new projects, and I wanted to continue my learning process, even though I'm retired. I'm semi-retired. I'm still going to be doing a lot of stuff. And then she's the one who brought up the podcasting. I mean, I didn't even think about it. I didn't know anything really that much about podcasts, but she obviously listens to some, and she said, "Well, why don't we try and do a podcast?" So that was the initial, beginnings of the idea, and then after that, we started meeting and talking about it, and we're finally to our first day of interviews with our guests. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course, and of course, Miss Alondra for a long time. She's played with you in groups, so we're going to talk about all of that as we go through it. The main thing is we're going to kind of use those questions we sent you to kind of begin conversations and all that. So, Miss Alondra, what was the first question we were looking at?
Yeah, so thank you again for being on the podcast. Our first question to you was, where were you born and where were you raised? How was your childhood like, and how did you get into music?
Excellent. Great question. Before I start, I want to congratulate the both of you for doing Saboreando de Todo. It's a big guys, and I'm excited to be on the podcast, but I know it's going to be even more adventurous for you guys. So congratulations to the both of you on that. Yeah, so as far as myself, the childhood, I was born and raised here in Austin, Texas. I went through the school system here in Austin, the Austin Independent School District, and I when I started in middle school, they offered a an elective, which was a class that was mariachi. And at the time, I didn't know what mariachi was. I kind of had a small idea of what it was. But I was in the program. It was seventh grade, and Mr. Castro, Ezequiel Castro, had come to the band class, and he asked, "Are there any students that are interested in learning guitar, some musical instruments, guitarrón and vihuela, and of course trumpets he would always need?" And so I signed up for the class, and that's how I ended up going through middle school and high school because he taught in both the middle school and the high school here in Austin, Texas. So I think is that kind of what you were asking me? I kind of lost track there.
Yes, where were you born and where were you raised? So prior to school, was there any music in your family?
Funny you should ask. I had my uncles that they would always listen to more Tejano music, more orquesta with trumpets and saxophones and so forth. And when I was young, maybe 5 years old, they purchased some instruments from the pawn shop and tried to create a band and try to sound like the record, although they didn't sound nothing like the record. And after about three practices, they gave up. But my uncle had the piano. He had an electric piano that he bought, and then of course the drums were there. And I kind of fiddled around with the piano. I didn't know anything about the piano as well, but that's kind of what got my start into music because I knew that there was something there. I just didn't know what it was, and I didn't know if the instrument of piano or drums or whatever was going to fit me. but none of my immediate family were musicians. I think it kind of goes back to my great grandfather that played violin, and he would go around, just back in the day with the cantinas and putting a group together. I don't know exactly what kind of music that he played, but I know that he played violin. But he was the only musical in the immediate family. And that's kind of what got my start, that I saw my uncles playing. And of course, my uncles owned quite a bit of albums back then, and they would play the albums all the time. And so I would hear the music, and I would hear, because it was heavy emphasis on the brass or the trumpet and saxophone and trombone, that stuck in my mind. And when I finally decided to take music in sixth grade, what kind of pulled me towards the trumpet was that when my uncle got married, he had hired this band called Los Sonics, and they had trumpets and saxophones, so forth. And so I saw the trumpet, and I'm like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And so that's kind of how I got started in playing trumpet in the band. But other than that, nobody in the family was playing any type of musical instrument or singing as well.
Okay. Well, that's cool. The middle school you're talking about, what was that? Travis Middle School?
No, that was Fulmore Middle School. And recently they changed the name. I think now it's called Lively Middle School.
Lively Middle.
But the school is still there. Yeah.
Right. What? And so, let me see if I understood. So you were in sixth grade band, and then in seventh grade you joined the mariachi. Did you stay in band?
Yes. I failed to mention that. Yeah, I stayed in band the whole from sixth grade through 12th grade. And mariachi was from the second semester of seventh grade all the way through my senior year.
And what high school was that?
That was Travis. Yes.
Travis High School. I'm sorry, I had Travis. It's Travis High School. And okay,
Yes.
and Zeke Castro, Mr. Castro, was he the director of middle school and high school?
Yes, he was the director of both programs. Yes.
Fantastic. And let me ask you this: what years do you think those were when you were in middle school? Trying to just kind of comparing the mariachi programs in the schools in Austin versus kind of when they started in San Antonio. Trying to get around the years that all that started.
That's a great question. I was thinking about that as well. So I went to high school from 81 to 85. So I think that from maybe 78 to 80 was my Fulmore years or middle school years.
Okay.
And when we went in ninth grade, San Antonio had already started the mariachi festival that they do every year. Because in my
Vargas.
ninth grade year, with Vargas, yeah, in my ninth grade year, we went to the conferences, and all I remember is the San Antonio schools there, but I don't remember any other schools. And it's not like today. Back then, it was just a handful. So I used to play first trumpet. So by my ninth grade year, so I went with Federico to go learn the songs that they were teaching. But it was only like five trumpet players and Federico. So,
Wow.
and the other interesting thing as well is that they did not have music. So they taught us by play what I play. And it was it was a good experience because I got to hear what it sounded like. And this is before YouTube and everything else. So like I had no idea, but to listen to it in person, what that sound, as far as the trumpet, what that sound's supposed to be, I realized that I'm way way off what I'm supposed to sound like. But yeah, anyhow, it was it had to have been maybe 81 when we went to San Antonio.
Yeah, yeah. So Alondra, I maybe you know this. I don't know if you know this, but the Vargas extravaganza that Cynthia Munoz has now that started in the 90s. That's similar but different than the when Mariachi Vargas first came to San Antonio,
Hmm.
which was 80, 81, 82, those years, which is what
Okay.
Alex is talking about.
Where
And
was
that
that held? Sorry.
Though they were brought at that time, they were brought by Bell and Juan.
Okay. Nice.
Bell brought them, and I don't know, where were they held, Alex? You remember?
I don't remember where. I know they were in hotels, so I don't remember which hotel it was. I do remember that we stayed at the Hilton del Rio, the one by the water. So I don't know if it was there that they were held. I do remember that, going back to the story with Federico. There must have not been enough rooms because he had told us, follow me, and I think I was the only one that knew Spanish compared to the other four trumpet players. So he told me to translate for them. I said okay, but he told me, he said, follow me. So we followed him, and I remember we were practicing in an alley. We were in the actual alley, and we were out there. So I don't know if we ever went to the Henry B. Gonzalez Convention Center. It might have been there, maybe in between between a hotel and Henry B. Gonzalez. I don't remember too well.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot of little alley nooks and crannies there around that area, so could have been any one of those.
So,
Yes.
so you were telling us about like how you started your musical career or experience your journey in school, but I know you in the professional sense, and I know that you have your own group. But how did you start going into the Austin scene, and did you venture out to San Antonio, or how did that start?
You mean when I first started, or with Mariachi Amor?
No, like prior to that, obviously that ended up leading you to start Mariachi Amor, but how did that all start?
You mean after high school?
Yeah, after
Yeah,
high school.
that's a great question. After high school, so I ended up after high school. I graduated high school, and I started going to community college here in Austin, which is ACC, and I ended up getting married a year later. So I did not play mariachi from '85 to 1991, and in '91, it had to have been '91, early '91, maybe January, somewhere around there. There was a group called Mariachi Relampago. They're still around.
Hmm.
And David Hernandez was a good in high school, and he was 1 year younger, and he was in mariachi as well. He invited me to Adolf's daughter's baptism, and at first I wasn't going to go because I had other, I was already married, and so I told him no, that I didn't have time to go. But then at the time, well, now my ex-wife, but at the time my wife said, no, go ahead and go, and that's okay. So I said, okay. So I went. I ended up going. I told David, well, meet me at my apartment. He came to my apartment. I followed him. We ended up going to the baptism there at Adolf's house, and jokingly, as Adolf always jokes, he said, "Hey, I'm looking for a trumpet player." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I kind of blew it off. And I'm like, "Yeah, okay." And I said, "Well, you got David here," and David just kind of laughed. And then he ended up calling. Adolf ended up calling me about a week later, and he asked me again. He said, "Hey, kind of feeling me out and seeing where I'm at and what I'm doing and so forth." And I told him, I haven't played since high school. I said, I don't know if I remember the songs that we even played, and you guys are probably more advanced in all these years since I haven't been playing. So that kind of led to eventually, he invited me to a rehearsal. I probably went to a rehearsal maybe about a month later. And it was just, I think we practiced like two or three songs. And he said, "Oh, you still got it," and so forth. And I said, "Well," I probably need some more practices. And then I think I went to maybe two or three practices, and that was it. Because by the third practice, I think he said, "I need help this weekend," and I said, "Well, I'm not ready." And he said,
Hmm.
"That's okay. Just play whatever you can play." And I said, "Are you sure?" And I was scared because I hadn't played, and I hadn't practiced. And so I ended up going, I guess, with black pants and a white shirt. And so I went to go do the performance. And that kind of started, that was my first introduction to Mariachi Relampago. And then from 91 all the way to about 2006 or 7, whatever that time is, I stayed with Mariachi Relampago and playing, same thing, weddings, birthdays, and everything else that mariachis do, corporate events. We did a lot of for Senator Barrientos. And at the time, I guess by the 90s, 91, 92, 93, the Chicano movement in Austin had really been very strong, I guess 70s, 80s. And we had like John Trevino, Gus Garcia. Gus Garcia was mayor pro tem here in Austin. I believe John Trevino as well. And then we had Senator Barrientos. So we got a lot of gigs with, I guess, more the Democrats that we did. And that kind of led to performing. But yeah, I think that's pretty much that introduction to mariachi.
Right.
That's cool.
So when you said Relampago Adolf, you're talking about Adolf Ortiz?
Adolf Ortiz, correct.
Oh, nice. And so out of all that, that's how Mariachi Amor came to be, or how did that start?
Right. So after my years there with Mariachi Relampago, I took off. Let's see. So Adolf ended up going to Tucson, Arizona for career opportunities in mariachi. And I remember we were in Tucson, and he told me that he was going to disband the group, the mariachi. And I don't know why he thought that, because I just pointed out to him. I said, you're the vihuela player, but we can move. I think I forgot who we had on vihuela at the time. I said, but you can move from guitar to vihuela. And then he said, oh yeah. So then his brother was in the group, which is Marco Ortiz. And I think he told Marco to take over the group, but Marco didn't want to have anything to do with contracts and everything else. So at the time, I was going for my business management degree, and he said, well, why don't you take over the group? And I said, okay. So I told him, I'll go ahead and take over the group, and then when you come back, if you come back, then I'll just, give it back to you. And he said, okay. And so that's kind of how we stayed. And I think it was like maybe between 5 to 7 years that I ran Mariachi Relampago. And I did find it exciting because that was kind of the world to me, doing the business management. I really enjoy playing, but the business management side of it, the admin, the relationships, and the networking and everything else, that's more my forte. And so I really enjoyed that. Adolf came back. I gave him back the group. I stayed in the group, I guess, till 2007, somewhere around there. And then I had a job, which was a mortgage underwriter. So I was doing mortgage underwriting. And in 2013, they sold out the mortgage underwriting side of it, of the bank. And they gave me a retention bonus, and they also gave me my severance pay because the bank technically closed in July, and then my last day was the end of November 2013. So that was the retention bonus. And then everything kicked in, the unemployment kicked in December 1st. So I had this money, and then I had opportunities to go to a different area for mortgage underwriting. They offered me a job in North Carolina, and then they offered me a job in Dallas, Texas. But I didn't take either of them. And in the month of December, I kind of took it easy a little bit, but then I thought, you know what? Let me go online. Let me see what groups are around. And immediately, I was looking at the websites and Facebook and Instagram, because Facebook was kind of barely coming up, I guess 2009, 2008, somewhere around there. So it has only been there for a few years from what I remember. So a lot of groups still weren't on Facebook. I don't remember, Instagram was there because I signed up for Instagram. So Instagram, Twitter, I think those were the three major ones, and then Pinterest, and eventually I forgot what other ones I signed up for. But I was savvy enough to know at that point, and this kind of going to the question you were asking me about Mariachi Amor, is that in December I realized that the marketing for the mariachi was nowhere near where it should be. And my little confession that really nobody knows is I went ahead, I put a name, and I started advertising the name Mariachi Amor. And I did not have a group. I had not spoken to anybody in the mariachi scene, for years. And I put my name out there because I wanted to see, well, does the marketing work? Let me do the marketing first.
Mhm.
And so, long story short, the marketing worked, and I eventually developed how to market it a little bit better and how to figure out how to do Facebook and Instagram, and then going back to the networking and building those relationships. And Mariachi Amor really kind of started a little bit before that because there was a guy named Rupert Ortiz here in Austin, and he was with Mariachi Estrella. And he had invited me to go play. And same thing, I told him, I said, well, I haven't played in so long. And he said, well, that's okay. Just go in there and play whatever you can. And it he kind of gave me like two performances that he passed to me. But then he said, well, you got to find the members. And this was like, I guess, September, October of 2013. And I thought, I don't want to do this. So that's kind of where it started the seed a little bit about me going in December to kind of see, well, what are the groups doing? How's the website? How are they marketing? And
Mhm.
when I realized I could have a big advantage on this, then that's when I created Mariachi Amor, which was 2014, and to present time.
Wow. A little to add a little bit to it. It's interesting because I know that you said that you were getting a business degree. Yes,
Yes,
you were getting a business degree, and then I do remember when I was meeting you, you were either you had just created your wedding network.
yes.
Yeah.
So I also have a Yeah, so I also have it's Wedding Network, Wedding Network Texas, and what that is it's an association. This kind of goes back to what I was saying about the marketing, but it's an association where people or businesses that are in the wedding industry. So, for example, officiants, wedding planners, um, venues, photographers, DJs, anything that has to do with the wedding. And so the association, what we do is we put together happy hours, and that's just kind of to network. Going back to what I was saying with the mariachi, the networking aspect of it, but going to network, going to different places, to Austin, Round Rock, Georgetown, so forth, and then also creating programs so that they get educated. And the programs being that it could be something with marketing. It could be something with the design. What's the design year? Because there's always what they call the Pantone colors. And every year there's a different color. And so that's kind of the theme or the overarching theme each and every year for weddings. So they may have a particular, some will go boho, some will go more modern, some will go a mix of Western and Mexico and Texas type. So it's different avenues and aspects of what the wedding industry is, and so we
Wow.
just have events for that, and it helps to build not only the how would I say it helps to build the relationships within those in the wedding industry, but then they also, as a secondary benefit, is they all know what I do, which is mariachi music, and so that's kind of where I can present. Oh, okay, for cocktail hour, for dinner hour, for the ceremony, have you thought about having the mariachi or a way to incorporate the mariachi in that? And because of that, it's been very fruitful, not only for the association but also the mariachi.
No, that's
Wow.
great.
Like
That's awesome.
I remember because like you said, I just got married. I remember when I would go play with you, those weddings were so extravagant, and that is going through the wedding process. That's why I eloped. It's so expensive. Everything is so expensive. So that is a really good market, and I like business, so that's really fun to hear. But going back to the music side, obviously you started in school and you went on to professional life. So what are some most memorable slash most memorable or accomplishments that you've had in music thus far?
Yeah. So it kind of goes more to the managing or producing side of it because in when I had the group Mariachi Relampago, when I was running it at the time, one of the biggest accomplishments that I had at that time was producing a mariachi espectacular, which we had here in Austin at the Paramount Theater. And I'll give you a little bit of story for that. Is that when I wanted to do the show, this was because I would go to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Tucson, Arizona for the conferences. And I wanted to do the same thing, but I knew it would cost a lot of money. So I thought maybe just doing the show part of it, just a concert part of it. And so that was the idea. And David Hernandez, that I mentioned earlier, he uh, he wanted to do it as well. And so we did a show before that. But when you're trying to do a show here in Austin with mariachi, and I think this was back in the mid '90s, it wasn't what it is today, because the what I was running into was the mariachi show at a restaurant, and that wasn't what I was seeing in my mind. And I told David, I said, you know what, we just need to go to the top. So I knew the Frank Irwin Center was like the biggest place, and I thought, let me try there first. And so, so we made it. I made an appointment, and I met the director of the Frank Irwin Center, which is John Graham, and then I guess the one under him, which is Jimmy Earl. And we went to the meeting, and David went too. It was me and David. And I told Mr. Graham, I told John Graham, I said, my name's Alex Ramirez, and I have Mariachi Relampago, and I want to create this show. And I was talking to him, and as I was talking, I thought to myself, this sounds ridiculous. You know, me here at the Frank Irwin Center trying to do a mariachi show. And I will always be indebted to and always grateful for Mr. John Graham, because he never rushed me at the meeting. He never, I mean, he was all open ears, and he shared a lot of information to me about how to run a show, what it takes to run a show. And he would show me these diagrams. Back then, you know, there was not too much computer. He actually had physical copies of how a show ran. And he showed me every single part, and he talked to me about finances and everything else. And I didn't realize it at the time, but he was my mentor for those shows for Mariachi Spectacular. And so I told him, and in the end, we ended up meeting. He became a good friend of me and David. And he gave us a lot of advice. And he told me, he said, honestly, I cannot have you at the Frank Irwin Center. And he told me the reasons why, which I understood. He said, but you have the opportunity to be able to do a show here at the Frank Irwin Center. And so he kind of set up a plan for me to do that. And so to answer your question, as far as the biggest accomplishment was, because of all of that and the mentorship, I was able to work with the individuals to be able to make that show here in Austin and the Mariachi Spectacular. And the second biggest place that I could think of was the Paramount Theater. So I had asked John Graham, and he told me that's a perfect place for you to have the show. I said, okay, that sounds great. And then just to sum it up here, it was, let me tell you, it was stressful, because just like you guys, you know, starting into entrepreneurship and learning as you go, I had never had any instruction on how to create a show, how to run a show, aside from what John Graham showed me. And ticket sales and demographics and finances and sponsorships and all of that. So I really learned on the fly, but I did ask a lot of questions. And when I did the first show, it was we had a pre-show in '94, and pre-show I mean at Zilker here in Austin, Texas, at Barton Springs. They had an amphitheater, and that's the one David and I did in 1994. And unbeknownst to me, John Graham, he went to the event, and I didn't know this till towards the end. But because the way the lights are and so forth, I couldn't really see up the hill. And he told me, he came backstage, and Mr. Graham said, he gave me a big hug, and he goes, "You did it." And I said, "No." I said, "You did it." He said, "No, you did it." I said, "No, you did it, because if I had not met you, I would not have known what to do at all." And he always keeps telling me, to this day, I saw him a couple of years ago, and I told him, I said, thank you for giving me that inspiration and the mentorship for being able to do it. And he always he always keeps telling me, he goes, I didn't do anything. He said, you're the one that did everything. But I'm indebted to him, and he's always been a great mentor to me and a great friend. But that was my most biggest accomplishment. And to wrap that up is that the week we had the show on a Thursday. The very first show at the Paramount Theater was on a Thursday. I don't remember the date, sometime in April. And by Monday, this is where the stress really kicked in. By Monday, the Paramount Theater had only sold 22 tickets for a theater that sat 1,393 seats. So Monday was a big decision. Do we continue with the show or do we not continue with the show? Because there's expenses. You got to pay the entertainers and the Paramount and the union and so forth. But I ventured in. J.R. Gonzalez was another individual that joined us at the time, and he was his marketing agency. So I brought up the idea to him. So he helped me with production of that. And so it was our decision, do we go ahead and do it or do we not do it? And we decided to go all in, do whatever we could to make that happen. And the Austin American Statesman, they did in-kind sponsorship. And between that and the radio stations and the, going in to do appearances at the radio stations, by the night of the show, the front of house manager called me, and she took me to the office. And it was already probably about 30 minutes into the show. And she told me that I had sold out the Paramount. And I could not believe it. And I was like, wow. I said, all the seats are sold? And she said, yes. She said, well, that's not why I brought you in here. I said, well, why did you bring me in here? She said that we have additional. The columns will block the view. And if we do sell them, then we would have to sell them at the lowest price that I was selling at the time. And then they would have to add additional chairs at the bottom so people could sit down. And I forgot how many more additional people it would hold. But I told her, go ahead and do that. And I was so proud of myself. I said, wow, I sold out the Paramount. I was still there at the office. And so I asked her, I said, since I sold out the Paramount, can you go outside and change the lettering to show sold out under Mariachi Spectacular? And she said, I'm sorry, we can't do that. And I said, why? And she said, because the guy that does the marquee, he's already at home. She said, he's probably in bed already. And I was like, so there's nobody to change it? And so I was kind of disappointed. Well, I was disappointed. And because I wanted to take a picture of it saying Mariachi Spectacular sold out, that's my accomplishment. And so I told her, is there any way? And she said, no, I can't. And then she said, I may be able to, but there's going to be an additional cost, labor costs. And I said, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is, I'll pay it. And she said, well, there's no guarantee. So I said, okay. So the show went on, and I realized, okay, I sold out the show, and everything went great. And at the end of the night, I had not realized it, but me, JR, and his girlfriend or wife at the time, we ended up sitting outside. There was like a little table, and we sat outside. And I didn't realize it until we got up to leave. By then, it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. I looked up at the marquee, and I did see Mariachi Spectacular sold out. But in those days, there were no cell phones, and I didn't have a camera. So I only have it here in my memory of what it looked like. But that was my greatest accomplishment.
Wow.
That's awesome. How many years did you do the Spectacular? Was that 1 year?
I did that for 5 years.
5 years. And what were some of the performers you brought in for that? Who were the performers?
In the very beginning, I believe the first one that we did was It was us, Mariachi Relampago at the time, and then Mariachi. We brought Mariachi Caporales and Mariachi Campanas.
Hmm.
And then I think Little Joe was our headliner, and that was the first year. The second year, I think we had maybe Ruben Ramos as the headliner because we were trying to attract the Tejano, the Chicano, going back to the Chicano movement
Yeah.
and Tejano. So we had a Ruben Ramos, and I think Caporales came back. Um, and then finally, the bigger one was Mariachi Sol de Mexico.
Yeah.
So we had them come. And at the time, when I was going to the Albuquerque festivals, mariachi festivals, there was a young girl that sang beautifully, and her name was Nidia Rojas. And I remember that I asked her, "How do I contact you?" This was back in Albuquerque. And so I asked her, "How do I contact you if in case I want to do a show in the future or something in Austin?" So she gave me her contact information. So I think the third year, or I think it was the third year, um, we brought her with Sol de Mexico, and that's even another story right there because another individual with Arista Latin, they were a record company with Cameron Randall. He ended up going to the show, but he said that he bought the last ticket for that show, and he was sitting like way at the top. But that kind of introduced, that kind of made that relationship or the networking because Cameron, he talked to me about the show and so forth and wanted to do some other things and projects and trying to get like guest artists to do a Rista Latin type a CD. And but he also liked Nydia, so he asked me about Nydia's information. And so yeah, I'm like, yeah, that's her. And so I made the introduction and everything, and they were talking and so forth. And eventually, Nidia Rojas ended up signing with Arista Latin, and that's when she made her. I don't know how many recordings she did with Arista Latin, but that kind of gave her the. I feel that I was a conduit for
Yeah.
the transition there from Nidia Rojas into Arista Latin.
Oh, that's
But
awesome.
yeah,
That's fantastic. And in the end, after the 5 shows you did, what eventually caused you to not do the shows, or did it continue on without you, or did you step back from them?
yeah, that's a good question. So what ended up happening, as I mentioned, doing the first show, there's a lot of moving parts to creating a mariachi show. And it was more the stress. I think had I done it, if I do it again, I will never put my group to play because that's you're having to do you're having to do the rehearsals and everything with the group, but then you're also having to manage the concert part of it,
Yeah.
and it was too much for me to handle both sides of the show. And in addition to that, we had some the sponsors were very particular as to what they wanted. A lot of it had like the demographics, and it was hard for me to keep track of the demographics on my end. And now I realize a lot of the mistakes that I did. I should have had a team of people that handle certain areas of a show because not to say that it's a show like Albuquerque or San Antonio, but it was still a show and there's still a lot of parts, and I needed to have those individuals. So by the end of that fifth year, when I did it, I I thought to myself, it's just too much work, and I didn't have the sense and the know-how and the knowledge to sit back and just write down, okay, what went right, what went wrong, and then how can I adjust it. That was my biggest mistake. I just thought, okay, if I don't do it, I won't have all that stress, and that's what ended up happening. I just stopped doing it.
I know the demographic thing's always that's a hard thing because these sponsors want to know that the money they're spending is going to a demographic that's going to help them.
Mhm. Yeah.
That is correct. And at the time, we had big sponsors. We had AT&T back then, and we had Southwest Airlines. Those were our major sponsors. Southwest Airlines took they took care of all the flight. I didn't have to pay anything for airline flights. So whatever Sol de Mexico needed, that they got all the seats, and then for Nidia and her mother and her father and everybody, because when I did the Sol de Mexico show, um, the Jose told me about the lighting. He asked me about the lighting, and he asked me about the sound, and I said, well, we're going to do in-house. And so he told me about two individuals, and um, not to go into a long story, but those individuals ended up coming as well. So we had quite a bit of people flying in and flying out. And then Jose was very specific because they were going to go fly out from Austin. They were going somewhere else. So he needed that transfer going that way. But Southwest Airlines was a big major sponsor, so we didn't need to pay anything for that. Austin American Statesman was another big sponsor, and then AT&T was another big sponsor. But they do ask for all of that, and I just, I failed in providing that information. And it's not that they wouldn't have given me the money. I think that it was more that I felt bad that I wasn't doing my part of the job to be able to get that sponsorship money. So that, in effect, as well, kind of decided that I better not do this anymore.
But the I think the most important thing is you did do it for those 5 years, and that's fantastic because those are until you did it. I don't think no one had done it in Austin.
No,
You were the
I
one
was,
that did it,
I
and I don't
was,
think it's been done since then. Really, at that level.
I was the first one to do that. And the Paramount Theater, they did tell me that I was the first Hispanic to sell out the Paramount Theater. And the way Austin was back then, it was a compliment to me to show that okay, I'm Hispanic, and because they did tell me, and there's a lot of things that still goes on today with all races. But at the time, they told me, they said, well, Roy Lozano's Ballet Folklorico, which they were big at that time here
Yeah.
in Austin, they did a show every year. And they told me, they said, for you to do a show your first year, expect about, well, he said, Roy Lozano brings in about 300 people. He said, so for you, I'd kind of count about 60 to 80 people attending your show. And, I didn't talk about all the discouragement leading to doing the
Yeah.
show, but there were a lot of people telling me, don't do it, it's not going to work, it's not this and that. The problem was that I was too dumb to know that whether it was going to work or not. And so I just forged ahead. So there was a lot of negativity, going into it. But yeah, going to that is that nobody had done the show before here in Austin. That's why I wanted to elevate it to a different level. And one of the highlights that really, that I take to this day is that the night of the show, the doors were closed, and I think it was going to open like at 7, but of course I was indoors. And I looked outside, and the people that attended the show were like they were going to attend a gala. They had
Wow.
gone all out, the guys in suits and the
Wow.
ladies, and I mean, in evening wear and gown, and it took me by surprise because I thought a lot of people were going to show up in just jeans and shirt and t-shirt,
That's great.
but it took on a different level. That kind of goes back to what you were saying, and nobody had done anything like that. But yeah, that's one of my proudest moments.
Right. Right. That's awesome. That's great. I mean, that's all fantastic stuff you did, Alex. Those shows, and of course, all the time you spent, developing, the mariachi ensembles through Relampago into Amor. Of course, all the Texas State students, Alondra included, that have ever spent time in your group, they always love it. They always got great things to say about your group and you as a director. So on that level, I thank you for always providing a good home for our mariachi students from Texas State University.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
It's been fantastic. Um, so, Miss Alondra, do we have another question?
Yes, we have talking about providing a home and stuff like that. I had multiple experiences, and I can have my own ridiculous, hilarious stories to share about Mariachi Amor, and I think we know a few. But I want to know, what are some of your ridiculous / hilarious stories in your musical career that you've gone through?
I was thinking about that because I saw the question. I was realizing there's a lot of funny things that happen each and every week with the mariachi ensemble. Um, the only bigger one that I can think of, because it's all just amongst members, but I remember in Mariachi Relampago, when Adolf was running the group, they had hired us, and this is before there were cell phones. They had hired Adolf to play, and we were going to be on a boat. So they gave him the information where to park. So we went to somewhere out in Lakeway, and we went out, and we went to go park, and we went down this hill, and there was no boat there, and there was no other people there, and Adolf had the paper contract back then, and he looked at the time, he looked at the date, he's like, "This is the right place," and so I don't know how we ended up into another area. Uh, we went to another area, and there was no pier, there was no load in for a boat or anything. It was just the shore of of the place, and the guy was waving from the boat and like, "Hey," because he saw us, and Adolf said, "Well, we're at the right place," and the guy kept pointing to like one area, and Adolf says, "I guess he wants us to go that way," so we walk over there. And this whole time I'm thinking, how are we going to get on the boat? And it's, and it's kind of like shallow in that area. And the guy's like, "Yeah, yeah, y'all can just jump in." And we were like, "No, we're not going to jump in." He's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, it's safe. It's shallow and so forth." And we all looked at each other and we were like, should we do it or should we not do it? And the guy, it was a party. It might have been a birthday party or something like that. So they had already been drinking for about 2 hours. And he's like, "No, no, no, it's safe and everything." And he said, "You'll see." And so the boat started getting closer to the shore. And he said, "Just jump on the boat." He goes, "We'll catch you." And there were like 3 or 4 guys there at the end of the boat. And so we thought, okay, it's either going to work or it's not going to work. So we kind of, one by one, and I think there was 7 of us at the time, one by one from the shore there, we jumped onto the boat. And, thinking about it now, I think we should not have done that, because I can see easily where one of us would have fell or, landed in the water. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's one of the ridiculous stories that I had.
Oh my God.
Some of the things that people make musicians do. I mean,
Mhm.
I
just
know.
some things.
I know.
Alex, it's been a pleasure talking to you today and having you be on our podcast, and getting to know you more, and actually letting the people that are going to listen to the podcast get to know your history a little bit more. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us. Thank you, Alondra, and thank you, John, for having me on Saboreando de Todo. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you
Have a
very
great
much. Bye bye, Alex.